E.T. here. Today's subject, the United States Supreme Court. Why it's so controversial today, and why the left might want to think twice before cozying up to it again. First, the basics. You probably know this. The president nominates a prospective justice. The Senate, once it gives its advice, may or may not confirm. Let's say the Senate did. The justice now sits on the Supreme Court, the number of which today is 9, but it can go up or down depending on the whim of Congress. Once there, the justice cannot have his pay removed, nor can he be removed from office, short of impeachment, and impeachment is highly unlikely. It's a very undemocratic branch of government. Next point. The court does not have constitutional authority to review any legislation, be it from the U.S. Congress or from a state legislature. The court gave itself that authority in 1803's Marbury versus Madison case. Since that time, the American public pretty well accepts that the court does have that authority. And to be fair, the framers did discuss it. They just didn't put it in the document. Next point. This may surprise you, by the way. Congress, according to Article 3, which deals with the courts, has authority to deny the courts appellate jurisdiction should it desire. And the court has done so in this century in cases regarding Guantanamo detainees. It's been rather hush-hush. The question arises, why has not Congress done so with regard to these hot-button issues? I'm thinking of those falling under the category of privacy, specifically Roe versus Wade. The Republicans have controlled the U.S. Congress 3 times in this century alone. Once under George Bush, so they had a Republican president. Once for 2 years under Barack Obama, so they might not have gotten their legislative agenda passed, but they could have taken a stand. And today, in 2018. Why have they not done this? Well, because Republicans campaign on and win on saying they're going to do something about the court decisions and the court itself. But of course they never do. Meanwhile, the left, pursuing its social justice warfare agenda, brings up one harebrained scheme after another that will be publicized and exposed by the Republicans as they're campaigning for office. And guess who wins the elections? What is more important to you lefties? Is it social justice warfare, feeling good about things, or is it specific pieces of legislation? I would say it's more about feeling good. Consider what happened back in the 1970s. Richard Nixon, identified as the most liberal president in recent years by no less a lefty than Noam Chomsky, was driven out of office despite very liberal pieces of legislation that he championed. The Clean Air Act, that was Nixon's. The Environmental Protection Agency, that was Nixon's. OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, that was Nixon's. He increased Social Security benefits. He proposed a guaranteed minimum income from the poor. And what you call Obamacare, he had something actually more effective. You might want to call it Nixon Care. He championed health reform whereby employers would be obligated to buy health insurance for employees. If those employers could not afford it, they would be subsidized by the taxpayers. This piece of legislation was killed by Senator Ted Kennedy, who later apologized, profusely apologized, because he admitted he acted on his dislike for Nixon rather than his concern for a piece of legislation and the American people whom he considered would benefit by it. You lefties, in your support of court legislation, might want to think twice if you're concerned about winning elections. Are you going to support gay marriage, for instance, over specific pieces of legislation? The Republicans, I can assure you, would love it if you do. Let's look a moment at something very important: how the court obtained the ability to legislate. This goes back to the days of Chief Justice Earl Warren, beginning in the 1950s, but reaching its apogee in the 1960s and 70s, when they created the so-called right of privacy. It begins in the early 60s with a case called Griswold versus Connecticut. Connecticut had a rather, silly law that forbade people from using contraceptives, regardless of whether or not they were married. Now, it wasn't being enforced, but this case was pushed forward in order to have happen what did happen. The Supreme Court ruled that there was a new right, previously unspecified, called privacy. Well, we all believe in privacy. Anybody who has to go to the bathroom believes in it. But the court's definition was a bit different. An example of the difference can be seen in 1973, when that right of privacy was invoked, in the Roe versus Wade decision that forbade the states from effectively legislating regarding abortion. The Supreme Court justified the creation of a right previously unmentioned anywhere in the Constitution, unmentioned in the Bill of Rights, by referring to Amendment 9. Amendment 9 gives a general warning to future Congresses that went like this: just because we have specifically mentioned certain rights, such as freedom of religion, the right to peaceably assemble, the right to keep and bear arms, and so on, that does not mean that there are not other rights held by the people. Well, the court simply identified one, but in so doing, they countered Article 5 of the Constitution, which says that any amending, for instance, creating a new right, or any change of the Constitution, must go through this process whereby 3/4 of the states ratify it. Well, that's a big difference from 5 out of 9 justices deciding on such an important issue. How is it, my lefty friends, those of you who claim to be Democrats, believing in democracy, the right of the people to rule in things, why is it that you go to the least democratic of institutions, the court, that act in an unconstitutional manner? It's because, I think, you want to look good, you want to make a show, you want to demonstrate your altruism, and all of that is more important than specific pieces of bread and butter legislation. Tell me what you think in the comments below. This is E.T. Thanks for watching. See you next time.